All right, let's jump right in. We are about to break down one of the oldest stories of a comeback you've ever heard, but we're not going to treat it like some dusty piece of history. Instead, we're going to look at it as a practical blueprint, a guide for building massive influence, even when you're starting from a place of absolute powerlessness. And I'm telling you, this is a radical counter-narrative to pretty much everything we're told about how to get ahead in life.
You know the story we're all fed, right? The myth of the self-made person. The whole hustle culture that says if you just grind hard enough, with enough grit, you can bend the world to your will. But what if that's not the whole picture? The blueprint we're looking at today asks a totally different question. What if success isn't something you earn through sheer effort, but is actually the visible result of a stable internal system that's always running?
To really get this, we have to start at absolute rock bottom. So, let's talk about Joseph. When he's 17, he's the golden child, his dad's favorite. He's got this amazing future ahead of him. And then, just like that, it is all ripped away. His own brothers betray him. They sell him into slavery in Egypt. In an instant, he is stripped of his family, his name, his freedom, everything. He's basically been thrown off what the source text calls the cliff of life, a point of no return.
And let's be really clear about just how hopeless this was. As a foreign slave in ancient Egypt, his status was less than human. I mean, the closest modern equivalent we have is probably a trafficked worker. He had zero resources, no family to call, no money, no freedom. The world's verdict was simple. His life was over. It was a situation that everyone would have called completely, utterly impossible to recover from. So this brings us to the central mystery of this whole story. How does someone with literally nothing, no power, no status, no resources, manage to pull off one of the greatest turnarounds in recorded history? I mean, how do you go from the absolute bottom of a society to running the whole thing? Well, the answer isn't what you'd think. It's not about being ambitious or outworking everyone else. The key is actually hidden in what we can think of as a kind of source code that's embedded in the original text of the story. And it all comes down to just two really decisive Hebrew words. The first word is wayahi. Now, this word, it describes a state of being that continues absolutely without breaking, unceasingly. What that means is that God's presence with Joseph wasn't just some good feeling he had on a good day. It wasn't a reward. It was a constant, nonstop reality that was true whether he was in a pit or in a palace. It didn't care about his circumstances. This was his foundation. And then there's the second word, matzliach. And this is where it gets really counterintuitive. Matzliach is what's called a causative verb. It doesn't just mean he succeeded. It means his success was being caused to happen to him by an outside force. So get this. Joseph didn't just succeed because he was talented or worked hard. An external power was actively making him successful. So here's a really powerful way to think about this in our world. Think of wahi, that constant presence, as his operating system. It's the stable, unseen foundation that's always running in the background. And matzliach, that caused success, that's the user interface. It's the visible, compelling results that everyone else can see. His story wasn't really about his personal hustle. It was about the power of the system he was running on. And the proof is right there in the text. This internal system produced results that were so obvious, so undeniable, that even his foreign master, a man named Potiphar, could see it plain as day. He looked at Joseph, and he didn't just see a good slave. He saw that there was a powerful force behind his incredible success. So, what did Potiphar actually see? Well, he saw two things. First, he saw the amazing results. That's the user interface, right? Everything Joseph was put in charge of just prospered with this overwhelming excellence. But, and this is crucial, he also saw the source of those results. He recognized the operating system. He saw that invisible hand of God causing all that success. Okay, so we've got this powerful OS and this compelling UI, but how does that actually translate into a step-by-step plan for building influence? Well, that's where something called the Glocal Bridge Influence Model comes into play. See, Joseph's incredible climb to the top wasn't an accident. It wasn't a fluke. It actually followed a very logical, repeatable pattern. The Glocal Bridge Influence Model shows us exactly how he systematically turned that stable internal foundation, his operating system, into this exponentially growing external influence. So let's walk through the steps really quick. First up is relatedness. Influence doesn't start with skill, it starts with relationship. Joseph first just found favor with his master. Next comes excellence. This is where his OS generated that UI of undeniable results, which built absolute trust. Then, with that trust, he could move to innovation. He shattered the social rule that a slave couldn't be a leader. He proved character was more important than status. And finally, sustainability. He built a system that was so good, it basically ran itself.
And that final stage, sustainability, get this. This is the ultimate result. Potiphar reached a state of what you could call complete trust. The system Joseph built was so effective, so perfect, that the text says the only thing his master had to even think about was the food he was going to eat. That's it. That is the peak of influence, creating a system so trustworthy that it makes you irrelevant.
Now look, this isn't just some cool ancient story. This Glocal Bridge model is reportedly being used today as a real practical blueprint. People are applying it to help immigrants in new countries, to help marginalized communities, and to help individuals facing huge adversity, to help them build influence from a position of disadvantage.
So, all of this brings us to the core lesson, the final takeaway that makes this ancient blueprint so incredibly relevant for every single one of us today. And here it is. Your environment, your challenges, what other people think of you, all of that stuff is just your situation. But the decisive factor, the thing that actually determines your outcome in the long run, is the underlying operating system you choose to run your life on. So in the end, Joseph's story stops being about him, and it turns the mirror back on us. It leaves us with a direct and pretty provocative question that we all have to answer for ourselves. In that case, what is your operating system? Because whatever the answer is, that's what will ultimately define your reality.